Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Fresno Art Museum. Now, before we start our talk, can everyone see me? Yes? Even in the back? No? Don't be shy. Come on up. That's better. Now, again, welcome to the Fresno Art Museum. My name is Artie, and I'm going to talk with you today about art. Now, can someone tell me what art is? Let's take a moment and think about it. If you thought art was a type of visual image that is made by an artist using their creativity and imagination, you got it. Here at the museum, we have all different types of art, and you'll be seeing some of it shortly. But before we do that, we are going to talk about a type of art that we are surrounded by, maybe more than we realize, and are exposed to more than any other type of art, and that's illustration art. We are going to break down illustrations into three categories: what, how, and where. Starting with the what. Illustrations are visual representations of words, concepts, or processes. So, simply put, they are an image that is telling us something. When we think of it like that, we can start to understand how illustrations can be all around us. One of the earliest types of illustration that we experience in our life is from children's books. The images in those stories are letting us see a visual representation of the words, which is really helpful as a child when learning how to read. If we think about the illustrations in children's books, how do we think the artists know what to draw? You take a moment to think about it, and I'll pick up some books that I've been meaning to read. Well, for some artists like Marie Sendak, they are inspired by their own imagination. Here's one of Sendak's illustrations. Do you recognize it? Marie Sendak was the writer and illustrator of Where the Wild Things Are. When it comes to the illustrations in the book, Sendak was able to have complete control over his characters and images because he was the one writing the words as well. And how do we think he came up with these characters? They don't look like any animal we would see around us. We don't keep them as pets or see them in the wild. So, how did Sendak do it? He used his imagination and was inspired by a number of different animals. Do you recognize any parts of these animals? Let's take a moment and see what we can find. So, what did you see? When we look at all these characters, a lot of them have horns of some kind. Maybe a little bit of a rhinoceros, a bit of a bison, maybe the horns of a ram. And if we look at those teeth, they're pretty sharp. What kind of animal has that sharp of teeth? I think of a shark, but maybe you think of something else. And the character on the left, that tail, that really reminds me of a raccoon tail. And the claws, those claws look pretty sharp. Maybe kind of like a bear? And the center character's hair, it kind of looks like a lion's mane, but maybe it reminds you more of your own curly hair that you see every day. But sometimes children's book artists aren't as lucky to be both the writer and the illustrator of a story. Sometimes they need to be inspired by words that already exist. For example, let's imagine ourselves as illustrators. We have been given a story that an author already wrote. We need to read it and use our imagination and creativity to decide what needs to be in our illustrations. Let's use this scene to practice. Superman says, "Hi, Bruce." Batman says, "Hi, Clark." Now, think. The two characters that we know need to be in this illustration are Superman and Batman. If you were depicting them, what would they look like? Where would they be? What time of day would it be? Take a moment to put it all together in your head. Did it end up looking like this? No? I think most of us imagine them as adults, maybe at night on a rooftop. Often that's the most common depiction of them. But sometimes, artists can make images that are nothing like we might expect. They are also able to communicate a lot with just images alone. Images are powerful. We look at images with our eyes, and our brains break it down, and it can communicate whole stories. There's a saying that's about just this: a picture's worth 1,000 words. Let's practice again. Let's see how great our brains are at interpreting images. Looking at these two images, what emotions do you feel? What do they communicate to us? Take a moment to think about it. Okay, so what emotions and messages were communicated to you? Maybe love, warmth, safety, sleepy, sad. Maybe you see even more being communicated. Wait, did we come up with emotions opposite to each other? How can something be communicating both love and sadness? Well, that's the thing about art. We can look at the same image and understand different things. And that's okay. As long as we respect each other's ideas and understand why they think that, it's okay that we have different opinions. So, we have talked about the ways that artists can be inspired to make their art. But now, how do they actually make it? Well, they can use a number of different disciplines and different materials. They can make their art through drawing or painting. They can make it with a computer program. They may even use clay and make three-dimensional art. Now, no matter what material an artist uses, they always use something called the elements of art and the principles of design. They're all different, but all help communicate an artist's message. An artist can use a lot or just a few. It's up to them. Here's all of them. Now, we don't have time to talk about all of them. So, the ones that we are going to focus on are line, shape, and color. After this talk, you'll watch another video that will give you more information on them. But for a quick breakdown, we have lines, we have shapes, and we have color. Now, personally, I love to communicate using color. When making their art, artists also need to decide on what style they are going to use. They can pick from a ton of different styles. And a style of art just means the way that the artist chooses to depict the images. Is it realist? Some artists want to make what they depict using realism. That just means that their art looks like the world around us. This artist, whose name was John James Audubon, made a book in the early 1800s that was filled with illustrations just like this one. Audubon wanted to create a book that readers could use to help them identify the birds that they saw. But for the illustrations to actually be helpful, Audubon needed to depict each bird as realistically as possible. Does it look like it's part of a fantasy world? Some artists decide to make their art look surreal, which is a combination of the real world and something dreamlike, such as this. There are such things as cats and mice and frogs, and they pretty much look like that in real life. But what they're doing and how they're interacting with each other is a fantasy. Most of the time, cats and mice don't get along. Artists can also make their work look abstracted. That's when they break down an image to just its bare minimum, but we can still understand what we're looking at. Like this. Can you see what is happening? When I look at this image, I see a person playing soccer, but all the artist is using is lines to communicate that. Finally, where do we find this art? We often just think about art being in places like museums, like here at the Fresno Art Museum, and we've already talked about them being in children's books. But if we want to find more of this type of art, we don't have to limit ourselves just to children's books. Lots of other books use illustrations, like this one. Here, we have a textbook with illustrations that help the reader understand concepts that may be difficult. Like on this page, the reader is learning how a key and a lock works. If we just had the words to describe it to us, without a key in the lock, the pins inside the lock are pushed downwards, preventing it from rotating. But when a key is inserted, it pushes the pins up at multiple elevations that all align and will allow the key to turn. That's a little difficult to picture in your mind, isn't it? Now, if we use an illustration, like the one here, that's a two-dimensional illustration, we can better understand the concept. Even better, we can use a video illustration like this one here. So art, illustrations, are definitely in books, but we can actually find them all around us more than we might realize. But first, quick question. How many of you are still wearing your PJs? It's okay. No need to be embarrassed. I won't tell a soul. Are you still in your PJs like I am right now? Or did you get changed this morning into your school clothes to do school? Well, whatever you were wearing, be it your PJs or your normal clothes, it has all been illustrated before you ever put it on. An illustrator or a fashion designer needed to sketch out what they wanted to make before the fabric was ever cut. And then, even before that, patterns need to be made so they know how exactly to cut the fabric so it all gets put together correctly. We also find illustrations in the buildings all around us. Architects need to illustrate their plans on blueprints in order to know what a structure will look like, what materials are needed, and how to make it safe. We can see the impact of illustrations and the impact that artists have on the world everywhere we look. Art is a powerful tool that helps us understand the world around us, and it's good that we can, and when we do, recognize that. Now, this is going to be the end of our talk. Shortly, you will learn more about those elements of art I mentioned earlier. You'll take a tour of the museum, and you'll also get to make some art. So, have fun, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your time at the Fresno Art Museum. Bye!